It's Matt, the Encourager here again. Professional quality there, here with a legend. Ladies and gentlemen, Lee Ross. Lee, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Matt, thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Nice surprise to be on the show. It's great. I was just saying to you, it's great that you're doing this because it's needed at this time. And for those who don't know me and a little bit of my history, I'm one of the old boys now. Along with a whole bunch of other guys, just basically, I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in Manhattan, in the late '70s and early '80s. So, I got my start on the streets of New York, and we can talk a little bit about all of that. I started in New York City in a great period for New York. It was a great time for street theater in New York City.
Why do you think it was such a great time? Why is it better than it was then?
Well, it was coming out of the mid '70s when James Taylor and other performers, not just musos, but across the board. It was a period in the late '70s where mimes like Robert Shields and Michael Davis and San Francisco was the place in the mid '70s. Ray Jason, some of the great old acts that paved the way for my generation.
Do you want to give just a brief kind of description of a couple of those acts so people get an idea, if they don't know, the kind of stuff that's going on around there?
Yeah. So, for example, one of my inspirational performers is Philippe Petit, who I grew up watching, the guy who walked between the two towers, man on wire.
Yes.
Philippe used to come down to Washington Square Park, and he had these two trees that he would go set up his rope. And it was a very special spot in Washington Square Park long before 9/11. So, there's really street performing pre 9/11 and post 9/11, so to speak, as well as the internet arriving and changing how we view things and how we relate to one another and all that shit.
Yeah.
So I was lucky. I grew up with in Washington Square Park, there was Charlie Barnett, Philippe Petit. Charlie Barnett, one of the great. He was the mentor to Dave Chappelle. Chappelle learned from Charlie how to do real comedy on the street in Washington Square, along with the famous acts like the Fireman, Tony Vera. Tony Vera moved from New York to L.A. and Venice Beach, and he was the king of Venice Beach for years.
Was he the king amongst the performers, or the king as in he was just a big guy there, a big, not to talk him down, but just to use a coin phrase, big fish in a little bowl kind of thing?
No, at that time, Venice had its own, there was New York and there was L.A., Washington Square, Venice Beach. And Tony went there and he became one of the biggest acts, along with the other guys, the famous chainsaw juggling guys. Yeah.
So this was going on in the late 70s. We're looking at the turn of the 80s, maybe?
I grew up with a book called Passing the Hat. And Passing the Hat, I would read it, I would reread it. I was 16 years old, Nick, there were other places like Covent Garden, there was a whole crop of all of us coming up at that time. And so I had already been studying mime and theater. So I started in whiteface. And so I ended up, there were different kind of cool little groups in New York at that time. This is back when, if anybody saw the movie Joker recently, that version of Gotham City in Joker, that's the city I grew up in. That version of their Times Square, that was Times Square was another spot when it was Triple X and the theater district. Magicians, famous magicians like Jeff Sheridan. I grew up with Jeff Sheridan, one of the greats. And these other guys would perform in the intermission when all the smokers would come out. You would have fit in quite well there, Matt.
Yeah, I bet I would have.
But I gotta have a fucking smoke, mate.
Time for a fag.
Yeah, time for a bag. That's right. So there was a whole group of magicians and performers who worked only the intermissions in between theaters at Schubert Alley in New York. So I grew up with all these different guys. The original group of mimes in front of the Metropolitan Museum, including Robin Williams, who would stop by every now and again. He was just before I got on the scene. He was like, yeah. So I was lucky.
What was he like as a street performer? Just ask very quickly. Big star quality. I've got to ask a bit more. What was he like as a street performer?
Robin Williams at that time was still, out of Juilliard. It was like he was, he would stop by and do improv theater comedy in front of the Met with just his voice. And so, but he was so visual that he did very well. He didn't have a regular act. He wasn't like a real regular on the weekends, but he would stop by because it was at those days when Mork and Mindy was taking off. So he'd already, Nanu. He became famous already. He would still stop by. There's a great old performer, one of the original great mimes in front of the Met was a guy named Hal Dion. And Hal Dion, there's pictures online of him and Robin hanging out one day. So there were great acts, but you had to be a very visual act in front of the Met because it's an amphitheater. It was steps.
Yes,
steps.
I tried to work some steps recently in Edinburgh, and I found it to be such a strange experience because majority of the thing that makes me look good and confident, bar having a huge repertoire of jokes, is the fact that I do a lot of really fun crowd manipulation. You're moving people into the places you want it to be and how you want to do without letting them know it looks like it's a game. And as soon as you have a big set of stairs in front of you, that's all fucking gone.
Yeah, all the different street techniques around how to fill steps or a lawn, like in what is it, the Mound?
Yes.
I've heard all these stories about when one of the other guys that I started with when we were very young in New York was Master Lee, and Master Lee and I toured, in the mid 80s. We would go early 80s, mid 80s. We were going all over the place, and he worked the Mound several years.
So
anyway.
we two guys in a van, just boogieing around Europe, seeing what's going on.
At that time, it was when Master Lee and I were first on the road, it was comedy clubs and America, going to all the famous New Orleans, the French Quarter, back in the early days when a guy named Michael James, who did a 8-foot ladder right on the top, he put his feet on pads and would do. Michael James, one of the great acts, Bertie McLean, all Jeff Moshe. There was a core group, Jose Torres, the guys who made New Orleans in 86, 87, 88. Those were the years that I knew.
What was the vibe on these pitches then? So I, as a young modern street performer, I go to a pitch and the first question I have is draw or cue. I'll be nicer, obviously, but I'll say, so guys, are we doing a draw? Are we doing a cue? For people who don't know, when you get to a street pitch, there has to be a way to decide divvying things up. There's either someone will stay in a pitch and they'll say mine, fuck off until I'm done. But generally speaking, at least nowadays, show people are quite nice, they share, and we have mechanisms for doing it. One of them is a cue, one of them is a draw. And so I'm just interested in 30 years ago. Is it 30 years ago now? 40 years ago, mate. Oh, God, sorry to say that. 40 years ago was a similar thing happening.
87, 88, 89, those were still very formative years, but those were our early years where our show had gotten to the point where we each had a solid version of our show that was from, you go through different iterations of your show. So, Master Lee's show at that time, Jeff Moshe's show, Fred Anderson at that time, the Amazing Dream juggling, Robert Nelson, the Butterfly Man, all had, Robert at that time, his show was his show. But some of us, as you've gone through, you put in a new bit, you take that out, it just gets progressively better and better, and your hat.
Well, sometimes it gets better, sometimes it gets worse.
That's right. Sometimes Sometimes it does get worse.
I've
You
had
try a
moments
new
I've gone,
bit.
what the fuck did I do? Well, even when I've not been trying new bits, I tend to find that because as much of my show as possible is improv, I've tried to make the crowd build following playful bit the whole show if possible. You want to embrace the chaos. And what I found is that
sorry, go ahead.
so no, carry on, buddy.
No, I interrupted you.
So what I find is that over time, doing the improv stuff, the show changes, but it doesn't change at this rate where you can see it. I'm not putting new bits in intentionally, but they are changing. Things are molding and evolving. And then you will get to a point where you're looking and go, oh, fuck me, I've made a show that doesn't work within 2 months from a show that did work, just by these subtle little changes.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different, especially when you're fresh out there in those first few years. And you're trying to find, who am I out there? So I get rid of this classic or standard bits that I used to get started. Which I did as well. That's
carry on, brother.
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, we got a phone. It could be a special guest. I don't know.
Hey, brother, I'm in the boat. Yeah.
This is good.
I can do, brother. I can do. Nice one. Brother, I've got to do. I'm on an interview on the internet. I've got to do. Can you come and meet me at the palm tree? Yeah.
This is great.
Nice, pal. Cheers. I won't really explain what that was, but I'm sure people can guess.
The palm tree. What's the palm tree?
So the palm tree is a pub just outside my boat. I think if you were an orienteer, you would describe it as a point of reference.
Right on. You say your boat. What do you mean? Are you in a literal boat, or are you?
I am in a literal boat. I tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to show you very quickly around my boat.
Oh, cool!
Just very, very fast. This is my boat. That's my home. I'm going to go outside and show you the top of my boat, and then I'm going to ask you very, very kindly.
Holy shit!
This is my boat. That big stick there, I push the boat around with that big stick. That's how I move and get about.
Right on.
This is where I'm staying at this moment.
That's fucking great.
So we're going to continue the interview here for now. It's not bad. I mean, I must admit, I've got a fairly crazy life. I'm quite happy with the weird life I've managed to pick out for myself. Moving a boat around by hand. Up until recently, going out and doing shows, making people smile, making people happy. No system, no man, completely autonomous. I thought I was the smartest guy in the room. Unfortunately, now I feel like a bit of a fucking idiot. All those skills you built up. It was the thing I talked to you about earlier. I watched an interview you did in '92. I think it was the Edmonton Street Fest Expo, I think was the name of the place. And you talked about performance. You talked about performers and the blood, the sweat, and the tears to get good at getting love. I mean, maybe you can describe the thing better. Maybe, I don't know, it's a long time ago, whether you remember this point.
Yeah, that I think you're thinking of Wellington. It was Wellington.
Yes, sorry, Wellington, one. Yes.
With me, Nick Nicholas. That was a great time. Lee Hayes, John Park, Dave Sheridan. It was a great time to be in New Zealand.
Why was it a great time? I'm sure that the people are there. For a lot of people, they can go and Google the names, and believe me, some of the younger performers will go and Google some names. For the people that don't know, try and set the tone, the scene, something, the emotive qualities of it, the social functioning of it.
Yeah, there was this great time when everybody wanted to have a busking festival, and it was lucrative for the cities and the towns. And so at the beginning of Halifax, at the first few years of Halifax, the first 7 years of Edmonton, when Dick Finkel was still alive, everybody. So in Australia, in New Zealand, they wanted to have busking festivals, and it was still tricky back then to get the town to buy into it. It was lucky that the World's Fair, Expo '86, Noel Britton, one of the great, Andre Pavarotti, Andre Les Bub, some of the great performers from England were coming over to the North America and Canada. And it was just, I was so young and in my own life in the street that I was just so inspired by French Canadian acts. So uh, there were just so many great acts. Peter, Peter Gross, but oh, my brain is on
It's
Frozen.
all right. We all have those moments.
That time in New Zealand with
Yep.
Anthony Face, we would get to go over there and work, just do the street, but in weird places too, like down at these docks in where was it? Auckland. We went to this gig in Auckland, and so it was great that the um, Lotto became the Wellington decided during the Fringe that year to do a busking festival, and I think it was the only. Maybe they did it the following year, but it was before Christchurch. You know, even though Christchurch became the festival to do,
Yeah.
um, it was still amazing that we ended up over there doing shows on Rundle Mall and in the pitches they had set up. The feeling was just big hats and where the people where it was early days, so it felt new. It all felt new.
And was it genuinely, because this is one of the things I wanted to get into in the interview more, and something I really want to focus on. Was it new? Because I watch a lot of what I hailed as being very original acts with very original work. And before the interview today, sorry, going back in the boat, off the bed, dog, off the bed. Oh, what I saw was a lot of stuff which resonated or chimed with your work. Very, very similar stuff. And so it got me on this train of thought of, either these guys have hacked you up, or, for the want of love in the world, hacked somebody else up who they also hacked up. I was thinking, these routines that existed before you? Did you write some routines? Did they go in there? This is one of the reasons why I keep asking about the world of the buskers around you at the time, because it's a big dialogue between circle acts now. Originality,
Yeah, I think that's always been, the case. I had definitely lifted a few routines that, were classics or standard when I was beginning, and I still a couple of stayed in my act, even though over time people just think that you were the one who came up with it. But there's plenty of people who can say, look, the real truth, nobody's around. The truth is that I got this from so and so. So I think at that time though there was just genuinely, in Paris, in Amsterdam, in the European, there was just more originality because things shifted at a certain point when there was this push to get up high and to make your show go up in altitude, because the mathematics of the visual ability of your audience to quadruple or triple in viewership, because you're not on the ground. And on the ground, you can get those front rows to sit down and you can get your five deep. But unless you're in an amphitheater and on the ground, or some kind of pitch that has a slope, you got to go up high. So once Al and Gavin Hay and different people who were
Leopard Man, he claimed he was the first guy in a pole. These kind of characters.
Definitely, Gavin is Gavin used to follow us around. He used to do his show with a partner, another young juggler, when he was 17 at Expo. He'd come out onto Queen Street in Brisbane, and it was early days. But he has become a great act, and I take his word for it. I don't know who the very first poll. I think it was Gavin. Al definitely made it famous. Al has made the poll, and Sean, Bike Boy, and everybody who But the point I'm getting at is that I think there was this push as we're getting into a little other territory here to do with ego and why certain people have to count their hat right after the show. I got to count my fucking hat, man, because I don't know who I am unless I made my 300 quid for this show. And so there's this weird thing about, and it's in comedy in general. After a stand-up set, you do your stand-up set and you're as good as that last time that you were on stage. It doesn't matter. Did the crowd love me? Did they love me? And so I think a lot of performers were very influenced by, holy shit, it's not the 6 foot unicycle. There was a time it was the 6 footer, then the 8 footer, then the 12 footer and Jean Michel and Heel and the Flying Dutchman and getting up to that height. And then there was the pole and Al and Gavin, and suddenly we're becoming like, you couldn't believe the numbers that people were saying, yeah, I had my biggest hat ever. And it was when I wasn't trying. It was when I didn't even care. Or, and you've probably experienced that. Sometimes the greatest show, the most magical moment happens when you don't even give a shit. It's the last show in the rotation.
Benefit show.
Yeah. So,
I've done record hats on benefit shows, and that's with Brian Reed. Do you know Brian Reed?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Brian, I love Brian, great guy. And I sound like Trump for a minute. He's a great guy. He was working during the summer a few years ago, and he hurt himself. He's got bad lungs, couldn't work. And so I went and did a benefit for him, did my buddy record, and I knew it was because there was a weight lifted. There's the way I look at it, and in my idea is that the audience empathize with you all the time. They want to empathize. They're an empathetic organism. And so if you're thinking, oh, fuck, I need the money, oh, what are they empathizing with? They're empathizing with something unpalatable.
Yeah, there's nothing, that's the thing. I think when we're young, you go from your $60 hat to your $100 hat to your $200 hat to whatever. But, at a certain point, and I think even back when, it's like it stops being about the hat. You've proven to yourself. I did that show at that time, at that festival. That was great. Now it's about, can I just be here, be present, have the magic moment, or will that magic happen where you feel the oneness of the crowd, the oneness with everyone?
Yes, and I know that feeling. It's the feeling when you walk off and you're shaking, you feel like a feather. When you've had that moment where there is that synergism between you two, and it feels like you can do no wrong. Every breath is funny and lively and has a life to it. Amazing feeling, but every performer I've said has the same thing. After that, you think, well, fuck, I'm not going to be able to do that tomorrow. Am I going to be able to do that tomorrow? Will that happen again? You get the downside to it, I suppose.
Yeah, it's true. The fall after, will I ever have that again? You're right. I think just back in those early days in the late 80s, the 90s, the mid 90s, there was just more, I think, experimentation maybe before the formula kind of emerged.
And do you think that's because, we hadn't found the perfect pop song at that point? Let's imagine the modern street show structure is the perfect pop song.
Well, it is. It's the perfect pop song. It's having the technology. As the technology kept changing, back in the day, it was the Walkman, and then the disc, the disc player, and then suddenly it became the iPod, and we're changing. The wireless was changing. To look at the tech today, I'm just like, holy shit. It's like time travel.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Bose. You get a Bose speaker now. You can plug your mic into it. It's wireless. You can run all these songs off your phone. It's in a box that's no bigger than a fucking amp can. It'll do 500 people easily without a worry. But I'll be honest, I'm going to postulate this idea. People might disagree with me. I think the easy access to amplification has made us collectively worse.
It definitely, when you're used to doing festivals and you rock up at the pitch and there's already a sound system set up, or you have a sound system that's good, people get a little, the new crowd is just starting to walk up to wherever they think the line is. You put your chain or it's so easy. People have it easy. and they don't necessarily know what the real street is anymore.
Go on, say the words. The kids today.
Yeah, that's that. Also corporations that own properties that go, we have a stage, we want free acts, or in weird places where Dubai, where Dolphin Creative and doing, it's in malls. You're doing your show in a mall. So as our freedoms have been limited, our freedom to go wherever and do a show, and I think this crisis we're all in right now is making that even more abundantly clear as our freedoms are more limited. You appreciate even more the days where it was just you on any street corner or any pitch.
Yeah, I've been having the same thing. I mean, I yearn to do a show to 10 people. That's how bad I've got now. I'm like, I'd do it, 10 people happily. It'd be the best thing I've done all week. Just a couple of any form of reaching out. I've forgotten how much. It's not that I've forgotten. I don't think I really respected how much I needed shows, how much I needed performing. It was part of my mental health. It's part. I feel like, and one of the nice things having this is that you do get to express. But I feel like I've had my legs taken off me, or I've had my hands removed.
Yeah. What was your first pitch? Where were you?
So first pitch I worked. First time I ever did shows was on the South Bank in London. And I went there with this contact ball, and I kind of did about a day or two in the pitch in front of the National, and then security guards came and moved me on, told me I had to go and work with everyone else on this 100-meter stretch. So I went up there, and after making, £1 an hour, something like that, I went up there, saw all the other people performing, and I thought, this big world, all these people with proper shows, and I'm just there like this, caned with a contact ball, and I just sat and learned over the time. I think that was a great pitch to learn because it was fucking horrible. It was horrible.
A difficult pitch is such a great way to learn. It's really true. Many performers don't cut their teeth on a difficult pitch, or you're told, to answer that question from before with back in '87 or '88. Michael James, the King, one of the great acts. He was the perfect show for that pitch. Sometimes certain shows work better at certain spots.
100%.
The case. And so, but at that time, there was no lottery, there was no sign-up board. It was purely like, you're going down the street, buddy. This is my spot. Fuck you. Take your gear. I've never seen you before. I hear you're a big act from New York. Well, I don't. There was just the reputation back in the '80s of who the fuck are you? And then when you had, it wasn't like I had a big name, but we opened a new spot in New Orleans that became the spot at that time. There are different, here's the thing. Sometimes performers, they rather follow the herd than look. If you didn't grow up with figuring out how to open a new spot, how to find that pitch and go, fuck this guy, I'm going to find my own pitch. This is not worth waiting for 2 hours to queue up to get that one big hat or that one show or the two shows for the day. I'm going to go make a new pitch. And you have to think creatively about doing that. You have to go look around in the city and go, wait a second. Well, at this time, the crowd flow, and it's like trying to fucking do calculus. You're like, this spot will work,
And then you have a lot of site-specific stuff as well, I suppose. This is one of the nice things about working different places is there's jokes which can only work in one place because the thing that the joke is wrapped around is there. It's site-specific.
It's right there. Right. Faneuil Hall, that was the spot, and Al and
so Faneuil Hall where's Faneuil Hall?
Boston, one of the greatest cities in the 70s in Cambridge, and Harvard Square was known as in the late 70s, Harvard Square was an amazing world of performers and musicians, and it worked. There was flow. People understood, respected each other, and was like, oh, the musos are over there, and the big pitch is here, and we all work to, I think Covent Garden has that to a certain extent,
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things talking with Chris last week, I think, Chris the Piss, Lynham, he said that he thought when they brought in the queuing system that it ruined Covent Garden. This was, early 80s, I think he was talking about. because he said before it is people would go, they'd do their thing, they'd go, but people knew each other, they respect each other. There was this natural kind of cooperation that was formed. And he said that did away with it. And it's so interesting to see, because I see that place as an emblem of cooperation and working together now, whereas he'd see it as, I don't think he sees it completely as that, but there's definitely some element of it being the child of an authoritarian kind of methodology.
Yeah, there is something to that, to the anarchy of like saying, I really don't feel it right now. I don't feel it. You go, and I'll go after you, and it will switch or whatever. It isn't all legal, and you're not. No, you're on the fucking list, and it's this, and if it's not this, then you go to the bottom and you lose your spot or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, just to be really straight up with everybody listening, what our numbers are, if we've got listeners.
We've got, at the moment, live, we have, I think, 10 people, and we get about 200 after. We're not going to get a huge amount, but it's our community. It's our people.
Our group, and thank you to those 10 people. Maybe I even know one of them. But, just to be clear, I left, Edmonton in 98 was like my last real year on the street, 98, 97, and I was living at the time at a great spot in Boulder, Colorado. Boulder, Colorado has a wonderful pedestrian walking mall full of tourists. And if those people who have never heard of, Boulder is famous for performers like Johnny Fox, who was the king at night, and the Zip Code Man. And
what kind of stuff they do for nighttime then?
Well, there was a great period in the 80s into the 90s where you could do really late shows, and that changed over time. But there were two different pitches primarily when I showed up in Boulder, and one of them was the children's play area, which was a pit. It was literally a play pit, and so you dropped down on these steps into this pit where kids would play on these rocks, and it was perfect for a tight magician. So Cups and Balls, Nick's show from back in the day, Johnny Fox, who was a sword swallower, worked lots of Renaissance fairs, Ren fairs, but he died a few years ago of cancer, and there's a whole page dedicated to Johnny. They named the theater after him. He was the king, along with a couple of other Slack Rope and a group called Air Jazz. And one of the great juggling acts of the 80s was Air Jazz. And they influenced all these other jugglers to move to Boulder. For whatever fucking reason, all these jugglers moved to Boulder. And then you could work on this Pearl Street Mall. And so that was my last couple of years. I'm sorry I'm dating myself because I feel so old now compared to all the young guns. I met all these. I showed up on the spot. I came back to Boulder in 2015. 2015, 5 years ago, I had my hips replaced. I had both of my hips, massive surgery on each hip to move again. And for a couple of years there, I walked with a limp. I couldn't move. All you young motherfuckers, you can have that attitude of I'm the big boss man out here. But one day you go, holy shit, my body can't do that handstand anymore. My body can't do it. The checkerboard guy, all of us, Jean-Michel with his injuries. It's like it all one day, and you're the old man on the pitch. You roll up and there's some young fucking kid on his lip and a thing in his mouth, and he goes, and you're like, I'm the guy who started the spot you're working on, but it doesn't matter because you're an old man now. So
old news, brother, old news. But you know what? Simple. You go out there on the mic, you do 10 minutes. They'll turn around and give you adulation as you walk off. You can see quality. I saw Chris work years and years ago. Chris Whining work in Covent Garden. Very few times in my adult life, I think he's worked in Covent Garden with Mattress Circus. This really fun group of international kind of clowns. One guy's a dwarf, one other guy is kind of a medium-sized guy, and the other guy's nearly a fucking giant. And there was beautiful physical theatre. They worked together, and so he went and worked with them. And as soon as I watched him work, it was like an epiphany to see someone behave like that, because I'd never seen anyone behave like that. I'd never seen anyone build up this huge, massive, ladder of humans, this huge pyramid of humanity, just to then put his coat on it and just trash it off and walk off as if it was nothing. Don't even give the people any fucking moment as they're all falling over each other and stumbling back. He's doing something else. It was amazing. I really feel a great heavy disappointment that I didn't see live a lot of the performers I hear about, like seeing videos of yourself. Pepe, Anthony, it's one of my favourite shows. I had the same thing when I watched Anthony. Chap who I talked to earlier said you were the reason that he's a street performer, Anthony Living Space. Don't know if that's something which brings you a lot of joy or not. I think you created possibly one of the greatest street shows in the world at this moment.
Well, I influenced Tony to a degree, and Tony found his own style, and he forever such a funny, and I think the thing that we all eventually love even more in some ways than the show is it's the lifestyle, and those days when you rock up to the pitch, you put your gear down, up your smoke, and then everybody goes and gets their coffee, and we all sit around, or at the end of the day, you're at the pub, coffee, and it was the culture of Richie Rich, the early days of Richie Rich, the early days of I only heard about Captain Keno till I met him. I only heard about Chris Lynham, and the Roman candle out of his ass while he sings "There's no business like show business." I would hear the myth.
And was that around when you began? Was that an influencing force? Because there is you get to hear the stories when you begin, and you hear all the stories of people like Pepe. One of the stories I heard all the time is of Rumpole getting out of a van and standing in a field next to a scarecrow, being a scarecrow, telling people in his van to keep moving, leave them behind. Just kind of weird stories of abstract human beings,
Oh, fuck. The three Canadians, when they first were out, and you'd hear these stories about Eric, Derek, and North, or...
Come on, let's hear a story then. Let's hear a story of Eric, Derek, and North.
Holy shit. Those were the most wildest guys because they came from comedy improv. They were theater improv guys who had... And you put them on the street in Edmonton, early days in Edmonton, and they were just like the kids in the class who you could never control. Even when you told them this is the time they could come into your show, like Bill Ferguson could be doing a show. I'm sorry if you don't know who Bill Ferguson is, but he'd have a massive crowd, and the Canadians would walk in and purposefully just fuck with him because they could. And so the parties and it was hilarious because Bill was, or whoever was challenged to keep up with them. They were so spontaneous. And, this is the beauty of the street, spontaneity of the moment. When something haphazard happens, a kid wanders into your show, you have to deal with a junkie or a meth head or whoever, and being able to make comedy. And so the Canadians were able to force you to be out of your comfort zone of, this is my show. I do this, and then I do this, and then, and you had to go, you fuckers.
You're off sequence.
Yeah, I have to stop this routine to deal with you. And they were great at it. But
you cross me as someone who goes improv quite easily. It looks like a lot of your build was improv and play.
Yeah, the entire opening, that's my favorite time as well for a lot of, all the things at the beginning when you're crowd building. The beauty is in not knowing how you're going to fully form. But there is that moment where you go, okay, now we're going to begin the show. Yeah. And you hit that button, and then that's it. The music, the thing, this is the middle, and now we're at the finale. I never ended up. My props are the people, so I never had a big feat challenge to juggle I'm going to fart this out of my ass and then I'll inhale this and on top of the thing. I was not that show.
So you finished with the melodrama, I assume?
Yeah, eventually, through the different years, I would have, this was the finale when I was a mime. Then there was this finale when I was first out there doing a vocal speaking. I went from being a mime to being, I was influenced by some of the great mimes who spoke. I know that sounds really weird. So some of the great acts, we just lost, as you know, one of the great performers I grew up with in Paris was Cotton. And
okay, I didn't know of him well. I've seen things appearing on posts, but yeah, not a guy I knew of.
Sad, but at that time, Cotton and all these great acts at the Centre Pompidou. This is when David Shiner, this guy who went on to Broadway, at the time he had got the first big contract. So all street performers were like, David got the contract with Roncalli, big circus company in Germany. And you were like, you can do it. You can make the jump like Robin Williams from the street to the stage and stay there. And, I think that's always been a challenge for a lot of people. You look at Nick with the Ships and going to the stage and those folks who made the jump. And so, for better or for worse, I think a lot of people were influenced. But at that time, the big act in Centre Pompidou was a performer named Pony. And Pony was this Canadian who lived full-time in Europe forever. And he was phenomenal. He would do these massive crowds with a live musician. And he would bottle, it was like Pompidou was Covent Garden of Paris. Yeah. So it was just a massive spot. It was very intimidating because there were a lot of great. So to go out there and go, I'm doing it. I'm just going to do it at that time. And Cotton was one of the great acts who would show up at Pompidou. He was always stoned. I'm sorry to say. I love him.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of.
But he was always, it was hard to have a conversation. We'd have these pitch battles where he'd roll up high as a kite and go and just start doing his show.
Well, you could be high and inconsiderate and have the things be, different things.
Yeah. But Cotton over the years, became one of the circus performances and cabarets around Germany.
Yeah.
So just awful to hear that the other day. Yeah, man, it's weird, the evolution that if you stay in the game long enough, you go through these different periods that all these other guys, we all have gone.
Can I ask you just this interesting thing I thought of when you were talking about progression is the people, just this is a thought I had of it, and I've been thinking about it for so long. What's the difficulty between exchanging the skills? Taking this skill and what makes someone able to go and be a good stand-up as well as a good street entertainer or a good storyteller and I think there's such a thing, there's such a training in street performance where as soon as something happens, you get adulation, you get good things for it. It feels good. It ingrains you in this mode of, play reward. And I think people find it hard to retool that to other things. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that part of that puzzle there is conforming by this. But you want to make that jump to a certain other area, like the stand-up, the clubs, or cruise ships. You have to conform. You have to kind of go, oh, I have to wear the suit and tie, and we all get our gigs. You all get those independent gigs. And a lot of people get used to, oh, this is a gig. I got to do my 5-minute special thing where I can't curse on stage. And you slowly get used to those other gigs. But not everybody, there's plenty of acts who are great acts, but they never want to leave. They don't want to go on to that. They don't want to have, or they'll say, oh, yeah, I had the opportunity to go do that, and I didn't like it. I did a few, and then it was like, fuck you, or whatever the gig was that just was too corporate.
Do you think there's something there was, I think, a thing when the music hall was dying in Britain. There was this exodus to television, and a lot of people didn't make it. And apparently some of the biggest guys in music hall the best people, the people who are loved the most. They desperately tried to capture this thing that they did on the screen, and it just never worked. They could never do it.
To me, the modern day version of that is when discos were fading in the 70s and they became comedy clubs. And so not every prop comic, street performer who said, I'm going to start doing comedy clubs, such as Amazing Jonathan. Amazing Jonathan started on the street, but he killed it when he became, when he started doing stand-up and working the clubs and TV in Vegas. Not everybody's, made to do that, or you just love the street, want that freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think back to Chris Lynham and the myth, before the internet, before you could just take out your fucking phone and go, oh yeah, no, here he is, Peter Snow in Montreal, right here on your phone. You could just suddenly look at a clip. But back then, those days were like, oh fuck, you got to find an editor.
This
video
does make me think of something. So you did a routine which I've much talked about with other people. I'm pretty sure you did this routine. I don't think I saw the routine in a whole video. I did do a bit of research today. So
the or what are we talking about?
What's that? The love? Yeah, the blind date kind of thing.
Date.
Yeah,
the date.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the 80s, in the early 80s, mid 80s, I would Washington Square Park and Charlie. There's a great example. Charlie Barnett, who was in a couple of movies back when it was. So for those people who, I don't know how many people saw Tom Hanks hosting Saturday Night Live this past week in his home. I don't think it was his home.
I haven't seen it yet, but I will be watching that after.
There was a time when Saturday Night Live with the original cast, and after that, those 20 plus years after, when Saturday Night Live was in. So Eddie Murphy, it had come down in the casting process between Eddie Murphy and Charlie Barnett, and Charlie Barnett had never finished 6th grade, and he was an amazing act. It was the most phenomenal act with just nothing. That was the beauty of him and his voice. It was amazing to see a comic work a crowd and you can still find him on YouTube.
Yes.
But at that time, Eddie Murphy could read. So reading cue cards got Eddie Murphy the job. And then I went with Charlie one year to play Vegas at the Improv in Vegas. And, Bud Friedman, the original founder of the improv comedy clubs across the America in LA, New York, the Improv where Eddie Murphy started, Bud turned to me in his Jewish New York voice. He was just like, you got to make sure Charlie does, take care of Charlie. And I had to, Charlie was a cokehead, Charlie was a crackhead. So trying to get him
the stories, yeah.
I've heard get him to the club. I had to get him to the club on time. That was my job for that run. And but he didn't do well in the club. Like, here's an act that was a street act that just when you put him on stage, he'd look at the microphone, he'd go, y'all can hear me. Y'all motherfuckers can hear me. And he'd throw the mic away. And he'd do his street show in a comedy club, a prestigious one, but he didn't want the microphone.
And would it not hit? Was it people couldn't hear and he just couldn't work with the microphone, having it as a prop?
Yeah, it was a restraint. It was like it made him have to confine himself to this thing that and he had to be free.
I suppose this was gone by the days of a little kind of headset microphone.
Oh, headset mics back when radio frequency mics were not standard in those days. Yeah. They were brand new. But
so what made him so funny? I mean, I've watched little short videos of him, but it's hard to get the real feel of it. I've heard Charlie Barnett was supposed to be the best fucking funniest thing since ever.
Yeah, back then, he would start gathering. He was so famous in Washington Square Park with all the drug dealers and all the culture that was there, and Philippe Petit too, and Tony Vera. But when Charlie came in, he'd start running around the park in a circle around the fountain, and people would start just running after him. They literally would be like a crowd of 20 people all shouting, Charlie, 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 as he ran around the circle. And then they would all just go into the fountain all together, and they would all take over the fountain. Didn't matter what breakdancers or whoever the fuck was in there on drugs. And it was just, he was a force of nature. Like when he would, because he's also high as a fucking kite too. He used to finish and collect in a plastic bag. He would get a plastic bag for shopping, and he'd get all the money, his hat, a baseball hat, in the bag. He'd roll it all up. He'd have a baseball bat with him. In those days in New York, you carried a baseball, a weapon, something. And he put
that was fine. Police are accepted. You carry a baseball bat, it's okay.
He would put all the money into his crotch, and he'd turn to the last of the crowd, and he'd go, "My dick's on the money," and then he'd walk off with the baseball bat to go buy more crack. But it was a very funny line. That's an old line. "My dick's on the money." But
yeah, but still, it's a good taste of it. He's doing lots of one-liners, just fucking firing them out every.
There was also some other great acts at that time that people know about who were also black comics. And this is in the early days of the Comedy Cellar. And the Comedy Cellar, one of the most famous clubs now in all of New York, you can just Google any Comedy Cellar. But back then there was another comic named Albert Owens. And Albert, who was a phenomenal, a veteran, and also one of the other greats of Washington Square, where there was Charlie and there was Albert. And Albert's the lesser known but yet great comic. And you can Google Albert Owens, beautiful face, and he tragically died. And then there was another, I'm telling you how we get to the dating game thing.
Yes. Yeah.
There's another comic named William Stevenson. And so William Stevenson would come out into the fountain every once in a while, because he was a stage comic at the Cellar, but he would come down to the park to hang out with Albert, and every once in a while Albert and he would go out and do shows, and he would do these small shows because he's a stand-up, and it was the reverse. It was a stand-up coming out of the club to try the street.
Yes.
And so Albert would go, "We're going to play Love Connection," because at the time, the TV show Love Connection was a big show. And so he'd get the girl out and blindfold her, and then he'd send the dude on the date over to the hot dog stand. And I was like,
date.
And so, being younger in my career, that was like, I'm gonna rip that shit off. And but I modified it. Yeah. So it wasn't about date anymore. It was about the walkie-talkie, the sound system, and being able to have them come back from there. We would hear about the date over the sound system while they're 2 blocks away.
Yeah.
And I also would only do that act. It became my own bit, but he never really got it to work. Whereas I would take out, the thing that I added to the routine was that I would take out a $20 bill at the festival, and this was only for festivals, that routine. When and a lot of performers will understand this, at a festival, you can do this longer, more relaxed show because they're not going to walk off on you. They're not there to walk away. They're yours. You can do an hour 20, as some people do, and you can still have the crowd. And so I would break out Love Connection only at the festivals. And, Waterloo one year in Kitchener, Waterloo, outside of Toronto, it was a great festival at those days, Waterloo. And Canada was exploding with little towns you never heard of. We're doing busking festivals in Canada. And so the 3 Canadians and all these big acts, Rex Boyd, Zip and Zap, they'd come over and work Canada the whole season. And so this couple comes up to me. It's been 2 years since I've been to this festival. And they come up and they go, "Do you remember us?" And I'm like, "Yeah, with all the thousands of shows, of course. It's right. No, I don't fucking remember you." and she says, "You sent us on the date to the movies because the $20 you cut it in half, and they go to they go on a real date that night, and without the audience, without anybody." And they'd been together for 2 years, and they were still together. And they came up to me, and I'm like, "How strange that my street show influenced this couple getting together." It's the weirdest thing because you've probably had that thing where you take a little kid out and you forever change that little kid's life by putting him in the center, giving him applause that changes the little volunteer or whoever.
Hopefully so. Hopefully so. I have a routine which isn't the same, slightly different routine where I basically force a couple to propose to each other. I just force to do it. I trick the guy onto one knee by getting him to do animal impressions where he ends up on one knee in front of his missus. And then once he's on one knee in front of his missus and I start to explain the premise, I'm giving him a shoulder rub. So he's not going to stand up because I'm encouraging him not to stand up as I'm talking to him. And then he commits to proposing. And it's always a bullshit thing, apart from once, when this guy basically turned around, looked at the lady went, "What? Are you serious?" Guy went, "Yeah, fuck it. All right, yeah. And they actually turned into a real proposal. So I'm quite interested to see. That's the thing in shows. You can have street shows, particularly. You can have real moments, real genuine things. I mean, they start as farce, and they can be farce all the way through, but something sincere is going on. Especially when people are playing with the public and people are moving by and walking around, and you're as much looking at what their response is to the things you're doing. I think this is where, clowns can do really clever stuff as well as all the fart and piss jokes and that kind of thing. It makes me think of this thing, when you're writing, when you've written your stuff, how did you write it? Where did it come from? Did you write it in a show? Did you notice themes evolving through it?
The gunfight, which ended up in Cirque du Soleil, I had to tweak the act to be nonverbal. It was always a verbal narration where I got to do the thing I love to do, which was what I call verbal following, which is something that Tony, Living Space, and a few other performers, and
it's what I describe.
Definitely,
my favorite thing is verbal following. So it's nice to see a lineage going on there.
At the time when street performers were bringing out those amplifiers for the first time, the Maxi Mouse, the Crate, early days of the Crate or whatever. It was a whole new world, musically, sound effects, whatever. So for me, it made a lot of sense to incorporate, dubbing in people's voices into the finale of these guys. And I was lucky at the time I got to go to the World Expo Expo changed street performing in Australia. Suddenly street performing was a accepted thing, even with all of the issues that have compounded in Brisbane or in Melbourne, where all the acts, or Sydney down at Darling Harbour, lots of problems with these entities, corporate entities. But at the time, I was lucky to have where I didn't have to hat the crowd at a big World's Fair, so I got to develop new material.
Yes.
And so the gunfight, originally as a throwaway, this amazing mime when I was 20 years old, Pony, he brought out some people and he tried to do a gunfight improv, and I was like, that's the thing to do, but to narrate it, whereas he was playing around with. But a flesh out how a routine gets developed over time, and you write it, or you're writing new lines. That's something that you have to be dedicated to do. You have to try and write, and it helps if you do stand up, because that's you're writing other material that isn't appropriate for the street. And then eventually film was where I ended up after Cirque. I just was like, I've got to write film. And to this day, there still hasn't been a great street performing, a movie with a famous person playing a busker, a real street fucking busker. It's sad. It hasn't happened yet.
I'll be honest, I don't think there's been a movie which has portrayed street performance accurately in some way ever. They just don't seem to get it. But I also know that when you look at real street performance on camera, it looks shit. So maybe I can understand why they don't get it, because it doesn't transfer to that purely aesthetic storytelling medium very well.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe we're going to end up with, as 3D immersive goggles where you're looking at three-dimensional shit inside a alternate. Maybe that's when we're going to have some street performing is going to be go off the fucking planet because you can put yourself in a show and
Yeah.
it somehow, I don't know.
Well, I've been describing the kind of what you see now as particularly with the quarantine, is like us being in little cubes in a void, and these little cubes move and they watch, one little cube has hundreds of little cubes looking at one point, and then, they move around, put their focus somewhere else. We've got this weird, I mean, I think crowd building on the internet sucks. I'll say that, but it's a weird new world. Sorry.
Yeah, I think as I was catching up with my old friend Dom Ferry the other night, and we were chatting about this, well, sea change, not just Las Vegas and cruise ships shutting down, but just how people are going to be when we don't have to isolate, or how afraid, just being able to, as a street performer, being able to say to an audience, it's okay, let's all hold hands. Let's all put our arms around each other. It's all right. We're safe. And that'll be a monumental thing. The performers who go out there when this is lifted and go, it's okay. Let's all give each other a hug, or whatever the fuck it's going to take to get people not to be afraid. Because
we've spent our entire lives not being like this. This has happened before. It went, things happen. We are okay. I agree. Yes. I've had this thought so much. Even now on the boat, I've just had this little feeling on the boat, and it's a difficult thing to do, but I want to go to a flat block where you can see the flat block and just set up in front of them. And I've got a board that I've painted outside saying text a tune, and just I'll DJ for them so they can go out on the balcony and they can all have a group feeling of something, And I think once again, what you said before, when we go back out in the street again, people are going to need people making them feel comfortable. And that's where we come in, I'd like to think.
And there might not be money. People will be broke, So it's a different meaning to be able to say to the audience, you can just come up and say thank you because I know many of you lost your life savings trying to survive this.
Yes.
Or give me a piece of fruit or a joint. It's okay. It really, doesn't matter.
Do you think we will get back to? I mean, that's interesting because I've been looking at 1918 flu epidemic, closest parallel that we've got to this, and what followed after that was the Great Depression. And what did you have during the Great Depression? You had people doing fucking traveling shows. Give me somewhere to sleep, fill my belly. I'll make what I can make here now, and then I'll move on to the next town. And maybe. I mean, I know a lot of people that's going to ruin their world. It's going to fucking wreck people because people are used to treating it like a job for so long, a normal job. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard to say where this is how this will turn out because it's going to take some time for whatever the new normal will be for people to feel good about going back out. I mean, there'll be a lot of people who are like, oh, fuck it. I don't even care anymore. I just want to be out with people at the pub or on the street. Or at a,
I'll be honest with you. I could go out now. I reckon if I chose a spot right, I could do a show. There's people out there that don't give a fuck enough. That you'd have to. I mean, I'm not going to because I care. And I care about people dying. So I'm not going to go and fucking risk people's lives. It's going to be a difficult choice when I choose when to go back on the street again. You could really make it work. There's enough idiots out all the fucking time. I don't know where I'm going to go with that point, but it's like
the other day they after Coachella was canceled, let alone all the big corporations, Disney laying off 50,000 people.
Yeah.
I look at they canceled Burning Man. Burning Man is not until the end of August, middle of August. That's 4 months from now.
That's a while. The Fringe, Glastonbury's gone.
Right. And these are some months away. So unfortunately, we get into other territory here where ask what is the other what's really going on besides this virus. And
Well, I wouldn't say
everybody
that.
has their own.
I just quickly, just once again, talking about the flu epidemic. The 1918 flu epidemic lasted 4 years. 4 years as it did its different waves as it moved through. That's
Yeah.
why I think all the governments are going fucking mental, because the last time we've had something that's a parallel to this, it killed 50 million people, more than World War One and Two combined. And we are better at shit now. But the medical experts at that time, before it broke out, said they were going to cure disease in 50 years. They were confident. They said, we've done it. We've figured it out. And then this made them all fucking, just go, yeah, we don't know what the fuck's going on. That's what people are afraid of, I think, in terms of the civic people, the organisation, the people who are watching stuff. It's a big worry.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
No, it is, man. And I live right near a town that was one of the few towns that was able to survive the flu epidemic, the Spanish flu, with no cases, Gunnison, Colorado.
Wow.
But, they say there's this old expression that I'm sure you've heard, which is never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah,
And
100%.
so I think that, as, some countries have said, paper money is dangerous. We're going to need a digital currency.
Yeah.
And we need a tracking system. So the whole social distancing, 6 feet apart, my understanding is that's how face recognition, whatever quantum computing or supercomputers can only track people. If you're in a group, in a crowd, they can't identify you. But if you're 5-6 feet apart, and it's odd, 6 feet, the distance we're buried.
I'll be honest. There's interesting stuff with this, and you can look into it and build stuff around it, but you can be brutally simple. They can track you easily. In London, if you watch, I've been in some protests before, and I've been arrested by police, and they track you just from camera to camera to camera to camera to camera to camera. It's not a problem for them to track you now. They don't need it to do that. I mean, the thing I worry about, I think you're right. They are going to stop currency. I think they do want to do that, and then it just cuts out a lot of illicit industry. Because how the fuck do you share wealth?
Right.
What liquidity do you have?
Yes. Let alone watching slowly and street performing. Even 5 years ago, when I came back out. And if you want to see that, I have a video. There's a great Key West street performer, wonderful, talented young man named Blue, and he's part of the whole history of Key West. Another great, amazing, historic street performing pitch location. And when I came back out to Boulder, Blue did a little quick documentary. Maybe we can add that as a link later.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think the main takeaway from this crisis is like what you're doing. It's how do I be creative and feed my passion for my what gave me so much in the street? How do I, so I'm going to interview people on web. What am I going to do? Am I going to write? Am I going to paint? Am I going to make music? What can I do that will sustain me, because I don't have the crowd and I don't have that right now. Not just training and working my 5 clubs or on, this move. Yeah. You got to face yourself and find a way to, sustain it on your own.
Yeah. I mean, for me, even just doing this is having something to do. Going from, doing busking for 20 years where I did sit and crunch my brain many hours of a day about shows. When I was watching stuff, I'd sit and I'd think about working material into stuff, and I didn't realize until it was taken away how much of a linchpin of my thought it was. And then to not have the option of it, and then know that you probably won't have the option of it for 3 months at least, minimum, maybe not a year. You've got to have something to focus on. You're gonna go fucking mad.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I was when Nick, I don't know if you know Nick Broad.
Yes.
Who started and Nick and I were in touch at the beginning of the app and the platform, and we had a lot of discussion about cryptocurrency and how things are, not just using a little swipe thing in your off your phone. For those of you who don't have any cash in your pocket, I have the Square, and so I did say to Nick a long time ago, there's no YouTube channel that is for street shows, like a
No,
news channel.
no.
There isn't that, and so it's great that you're doing this because I've thought about it. I've had a couple of friends go, why don't you do the street show channel on YouTube? And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's a full-time fucking job. It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
It's a lot of work.
Well, it's something to do for now. The weird and ironic thing about it is that while I'm doing something that's intensely not just about street, but mostly about street, it's street and other interesting things. So I had a guy who is an anarchist poet on. I had a lady who did kind of extreme fetish cabaret performance on, just chatting about different stuff. But it's just interesting pieces of art going on. But most people are street performers. And for the street performer side, we're talking about a piece of art that can't be done. Nobody's doing it, like probably in most of the globe at the moment. And we're not alone. In many industries, it's the same. All the industries that just focus on entertainment, kind of non-essential stuff, they're all not happening right now. It's pretty fucking mad to think, isn't it?
It's mad to think it. Absolutely. I mean,
But then
the idea that...
Sorry, carry on.
Oh, just, the idea like here I am trying to write movies and get movies made, and it's the death of the cinema maybe right now. People aren't going to go back to movies, theaters, maybe,
It might be the death of the cinema industry, but it doesn't have to be the death of cinema. The ability to make video is so much more accessible than it's ever been before. I mean, that's a form of dread, I think, if you're, in the industry, definitely.
In your home, you're watching your 72-inch flat plasma screen, but you're not in the communal environment of shared experience with 50, 100 other people watching whatever Star Wars or whatever movie. The only street performing movie that had some circle show in it was The Walk, and it showed the early days of Philippe Petit in Paris. And it was all CGI. It was all fake because you had an actor who could not really juggle 5 balls.
Yeah. In the Eddie Izzard movie, they've got some of Kino's treasure trove of footage from the 80s. In fact, I'm going to try and talk to one of the things I'm thinking about doing with some of the interviews and we'll chat with people about it who've done interviews before is to get this guy to edit it down and put it with footage of the performances and of the people they're talking about, and make it a more kind of watchable medium, because this is fun. It's nice to sit and chat. It's nice to people live who are sitting and watching it, chatting. But, I'm not the greatest interviewer ever. There's a lot of faff going around. You know how the thing works. You cut the faff. And so I'm going to chat with Kino, and I think he's got a great, huge wealth of footage from the 80s in his loft, which would be fucking amazing because it's few and far between, isn't it?
A lot of the old footage, you're lucky to find some from somebody like Kino or some.
But I think he had it over any of the guys that went through that time. I think he was quite active on it. I can only imagine a new piece of technology.
Yeah. With film or video back then, cameras that were like that big, huge cameras.
Yeah, and that was like the first time it had become accessible for the public to film stuff as well, I suppose.
Yeah, if anybody wants to watch any of my films, my Sundance movie or my recent comedy, I have a comedy about a pair of magic jeans, and they produce a $100 bill in one of the pockets. So it's, in America, a Benjamin is a $100 bill. So it's about a pair of magic money producing jeans called Benjamin Troubles. That's all on my Vimeo channel. So if anybody listening wants to check out one of my short films or feature, it's leeross.net. So all one word, leeross.net. It takes you right to Vimeo, and you can enjoy a movie on me, enjoy a free movie.
I think it's on YouTube as well, am I right?
It's on Amazon and iTunes and Google, but but this is the only spot you can go. I'm saving you a couple of dollars,
Okay. Yeah, wicked. There you go. Deals have been had. So,
Yeah.
if you had to pick some of the most interesting shows you've watched over your, great time doing shows, what would be the shows you laud as the best examples of the craft?
Oh man, damn, that's a fucking question.
Yeah, it's very open ended as well. It's meant to be. It gives you
Yeah.
remit to.
Oh fuck! I come from a period of time. There's certain. It's like this period. I wish I had seen certain acts that I've heard about over the years. Uh, you know. Can I say? One person I always loved was the creativity of El Gleno Grande, uh, Glenn Singer, who started like me as a mime. A lot of people don't know that, but when he was able to create the pony that he rides, that he becomes the guy with the little legs on the pony, jumping
Yeah.
over in slow motion. It was one of the great moments, where I was just like, "You've hit it! You hit gold! It's fucking genius." There was. I don't know, over the years, I mean, the three Canadians absolutely loved their show when they were doing it all together. Um, there are acts that influenced me. So, there's an old comedy guy who was a mime named Marty Polio. And Marty Polio, one of the greatest physical comics who worked in the clubs. But he didn't start on the street. But in terms of classic street shows, um, uh, I always enjoyed Master Lee. It's always hard to say who can you watch more than once. Who can you watch 5, 7, 10 times and you never get tired at that time of watching their
Yeah.
show? And that's the Butterfly Man, one of the greatest acts ever, especially in Pier 39 in the old stage. They moved the stage around, but there was a time where you look at these photos, and if you were lucky to see Robert Nelson in his prime, or in Canadian acts, there's some great, not just Checkerboard. I mean, there's so many.
So let's say this: if you were walking through a festival, what would be most likely to make you stop and watch a show? What qualities do you look for in a show? What interests you? What entertains you as someone who's a show maker, show watcher?
um, I, I there's nothing more fun than seeing someone who has confidence. The confidence to let it not, to go out in the moment and not know what you're going to do in that, or you have a new prop and you don't know, how am I going to make this work into something?
Yeah.
And so, even though that they can do this, and this, um, there's nothing like wonderful confidence that's kind of hidden. I think Living Space had that. I think of an act named Jeff Bradley back in the day, a Canadian. He did a triple stack rollabola, but he did a lot of other things that were just very confident and funny. Yeah.
What about the content in there? Are you somebody who doesn't mind watching someone who is crafted something you've heard before, or are you someone who leans towards wanting to hear stuff you haven't heard before and try and search something out that's surprising to you?
Yeah, oh man, I think that there was a time where I couldn't watch any more shows. There came this day, it was painful, where someone might come up and go, "Oh fuck, man, you got to see this new bit I'm doing," and I'd be like, I don't care. I don't, because there's a formula. The street is ultimately about getting the money in the hat, and so there is a reason it's structured the way it is. And so that structure sometimes influences that I know how the show is going to work. I know how it's going to play. And every once in a while, there's somebody that takes you by surprise. And, I went up to Canada for my last and only street performing festival in Ottawa in 2016. And I met this husband and wife couple, and he was a juggler, and a musician, and she was a musician, and they had some really lovely. I can't remember what their names were off of the top of my head. They live in Europe, but they did this really. I love eccentric characters. I love seeing original eccentric characters and how they play together, as opposed to the usual guy just going, "Hi, I'm going to start the show in a few minutes. Come on up, yeah, stand, and all that stuff." But character building is always what gets me.
Yeah. And I say that as well because some people are watching are people who are writing shows just beginning. They've just got past the point of forming a kind of basic understanding of what a show is. And I try and have a bit of an influence just because of my own story of really, learning loads of hack. I became a hack dictionary and went through different phases of different styles. Just because I'd never done any performing school. I didn't have much knowledge of it. I just started performing, doing contact juggling. Then I was just telling the audience, say yeah. Doing a trick, get them to say yeah again, do a trick. Most basic bullshit you can ever see. And then James, guy who I interviewed earlier on in the video, on the podcast, he basically walked on and went, "Don't watch this guy just saying yeah after every trick. I've got a show, blah, 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 put me down." And it kind of hurt. It was true. It was just bullshit. It was the simplest form of interaction and contract I could form. So I went and watched all the street performers and I learned all their bits and then formed the show. Went to Covent Garden with a show which wasn't unoriginal, but was completely built on hack. Formed a power show there with a chainsaw, and I had a tall bicycle which used to take apart and form into a 6-foot stage, which was a great fucking prop, really good prop, and formed a power show. And then Brian Reed chatted to me and was just like, "Yeah, you're hack. This is hack. This is all stolen. People write their fucking material. What the fuck are you doing?" And so I got rid of the bike, got rid of the chainsaw, went through a process of soul searching and writing material and trying to form something that's a bit more original, a bit more, has something to say in it. There's metaphor, there's subtext, there's things that are being communicated underneath the basic thing that's happening. And so when I see people now learning doing hack, I give them shit for it. I say, don't do it. Don't fucking do hack. Don't learn doing hack. But then I'm only having a go at them for doing what I did. It leaves me in this weird quandary, this weird place on how to advise people. Am I going to be a hypocrite or?
Yeah, it's always wonderful challenging yourself with performers become lazy sometimes too. Where like they won't learn how to do a freestanding ladder going back and forth. They'll just have the ropes like off of the pole, and they'll put ropes on the fucking freestanding ladder. They'll climb up the ladder and they'll get up to the top, but there's some ropes with some fucking guys. I'm like, learn the fucking ladder. Why do you have the ladder if you're not going to learn the trick and do it properly? And but for me, I know we should wrap up. I do need to go shopping. Fucking shopping now with my mask and the fucking unbelievable.
It's like, the early 90s, they had those images of people walking around with masks on in the future. And we were laughing about it. It was like, oh, look at that. What a joke. What satire. And now it's fucking, we had 2020 with masks on out of the house. But it's from a disease, not pollution.
I've been watching a stupid vampire TV series called The Strain, and it's from a few on Hulu, but it's got all the shit that in New York, and their masks and their swabs and testing, and I'm like, how the fuck did this stupid vampire horror series nail it? So, not Contagion or any of these big movies, but this fucking TV series was great. For me, I'll just end by I'll let's sign off in a second, but I want to say that because I came from starting on the street in silence, that for me Pepe is just one of the great acts because he embodies the simplicity, the beauty of simplicity. And the simplicity I'm talking about is it's you, your presence, your physicality, and a little box of just a few props, some things. But Pepe would get massive crowds in Halifax or in Australia when we were, so I always love the simplicity of someone like Pepe, doing it all, creating magic that way.
Yeah.
Because he didn't know where he was going to go because it all depended on the environment, what's walking into your show. So,
and that's the thing, that's the thing about getting that bit which a lot of people do at the beginning, where they're looking around and they're trying to see what they have to play with.
Right.
And I think people go to the box and then get onto stuff because, you know, it's hard to sit around looking and waiting and trying to form things. And, you know, you've only got two routes. You either machine gun it out and just go, all right, mate.
That's a big dog.
Yeah, big softy.
Yeah.
The things I like, I've got the dog in the show, and he doesn't do anything. He just sits at the back. And when I've got my kid volunteer, do a whole massive thing with kids where I make them compete, and it's a metaphor for capitalism and fucking all this other sort of stuff. Sounds trite. I think it's funny. And so once I've got the kid, I use the rest of the show. I ask him if he likes dogs, walk him over to the dog. I go, oh, it's all right, sit down, say hello, wait till the kid starts stroking the dog and go, oh, he's very nice, his name's Killer.
Right.
And I like one of these things in shows is I think you get to address people's discomforts in a farcical environment. And I know having him around in shows with the kids all the time, I know he's fine, 100%.
Man, there was this spot that we started on Sundays. It was only for Sundays in a St. Kilda in Melbourne, St. Kilda. This was a long time ago, but it was a great pitch. It was on the grass. You could get them all seated and relaxed. There was enough room for the big, 3 rows deep on the back. And I get this kid to stand up on my amplifier. That was how I got him on. It was the amp was flat. You could sit on it, stand on it. And I say to the kid, do not piss in your pants while you're up here, John. And of course, that's always, please don't pee in your pants. It's a pretty standard line. And this kid wearing shorts, he just starts pissing down his legs, on his shoes, there on the amplifier. I got the mic, so it's just was this wonderful moment. The whole audience, you can't manufacture that. The thing that you're, oh my God, he took a shit or whatever it is, but this kid peeing was just killed it. And, those were the moments you live for out there.
It's one of the things I think that if you are putting together shows and you are thinking about how to advance a show, setting yourself up where things like that will happen, where you'll have random drunks coming into the show, where you'll have people coming through having to deal with walking through a show, all these different circumstances where it brings you, but definitely into a moment where you can play, are great ways to develop that stuff. Great ways to introduce. I've had my favourite times when drunks come in the show. Drunks can be great. I had a guy come out into the show and wave his dick around, and in the end, you manage to if you can stay calm, keep it funny. Don't be spiteful. I mean, that's the challenge. I think people mistake it. They think because they're being a dick, that you have the right then to be vengeful and spiteful to them because you feel hurt.
Yeah.
But you can't do that. Empathy again. They empathise with you, don't they?
Yeah, the responsibility of being of the power that you do have when you do have the big crowd and you have the attention. I can't wait to see your show now. I'm like, I got to see what
Well, don't search on the internet because it looks shit. Every bit of internet footage I've ever found of my work, I look awful. People never film and promote and publish the good shows. Or the good moments, I'm known as a tennis racket guy, and I fucking hate the tennis racket. It's just the trick drives me fucking mental. It's my finale to the show, but I just can't figure another finale out that's going to make money as reliably. I've done loads of different ones in Edinburgh in the festival. I do different finales with no tricks at the end, but in off-season Covent Garden, I'm not going to be able to just make the kids do 4 different forms of political system and then give them all a £5 each and then collect. It works at a festival. Doesn't fucking work on the street when you've fought to build them. You need to have that fucking contract ending thing. And it's annoying. How the fuck do you create that in a form of comedy performance?
Right. Andre, my mind was blown when I went to Expo. I went to Vancouver in '86. It was my first really big gig, paid contract. Everybody has that, the one big gig that gets you going. And that was the year that street performing was part of Vancouver, all over the place in the World's Fair. And Andre Pavarotti, Andre was one of the big acts. And I had never ever seen someone finish a show with a race to see who can eat 10 crackers, salty crackers, and he would spray with a bottle. He would squeeze this bottle with a straw, and if you raise your hand, one of the volunteers, 5 guys, each getting 10 big crackers, and whoever can show their mouth open with no cracker in their mouth wins the prize. And he would squeeze and squirt a little dollop of water if you raised your hand. So when the crowd screams go, it was hilarious to watch grown men try to finish these 10 crackers, and they're each raising their hand going, oh my God, and getting a dollop of water. And at the time, I was like, oh, you don't have to do 5 fire torches. You don't have to do a bowling ball or a this. You can just do something fucking stupid and have a huge with something that simple. So
Yes.
whatever it is, when you find it with, and you move on from, whatever, the racket or the gunfight, whatever it is. God knows I hate doing that gunfight, man.
Yeah.
Oh,
Why
fuck.
do you hate it? I mean, I hate the racket because it's a lie, but why do you hate the gunfight?
Because it's that feeling of like, I'm on autopilot, I'm locked in, here we go, let's do it. This is the finale. I've got to get through this thing in 10 minutes and get it all wrapped up, and they've got to stay on the script. I don't want someone who thinks he's a funny fucking guy messing up the show, because, there's always that one fucking volunteer who thinks he's funnier than you. Not all the time.
When you're on a pitch where there's nobody else around, you can go, let's see where this is going to go, and you can take a step back and gear down, and this is one of the things I think it's a little frustrating. I've got to make my show where sometimes I can get 15, 20 kids out if I've got a lot of families around, and then you're getting rid of them just cruelly under the auspice of competition in bloody capitalism. And some really funny things evolve out of it when you've got lots of kids. You can separate them off into teams. You can do all sorts of different stuff. You can't do any of that on a 45-minute pitch. You can't do it, because as soon as you start doing the more complicated stuff, it can go on for fucking ever. And I think it's the same kind of thing where you've been booked to do a festival. You have a slot. No. And this time constraint, it stops you from moving that gear backwards again and going, right, let's see where this will go.
Right. Yeah, I haven't done any street stuff really since 2016. So
yeah, it's not that long ago from some people I've talked to since they've done their street stuff. So
I have the bag of tricks. I still have the box of stuff, and my amplifier is still sitting over there. But this has bin great to chat to you about all of this stuff.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Lee. Really has.
And I think it's great what you're doing. It's needed to keep, because Checkerhead got really tired of, the podcast Stories from the Pitch. That's a podcast, you just listen to it, but it's also great to see each other as well.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, let's see where we go with it. I'm going to plow some time into it. Hopefully try and make it as good as we can. I want to thank you for being here, mate. It was great. Thank you for everyone who watched. Hope you enjoyed the chat. Ciao for now. Bye. 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 Bye.